what happens is that we write the way we have been rewarded to write in university. You're rewarded to write as much as you can. You're aiming for a 500 word limit, 10,000 word paper, whatever. The goal is to show the teacher how much you know. That's not the goal of writing in the real world. So it's a completely different shift.
All right, we're live. Thanks again. Thank you, Lesley, for joining. And thank you, listeners, for coming on and giving us your time to listen to another episode of Life Sciences 360. Our guest today is Lesley Worthington. She is a writer, a consultant, and she helps quality assurance and regulatory affairs professionals improve their writing and communication skills. So thank you for your time, Lesley, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
The first thing I want to ask you, there's 3 pieces of information that I found on your profile when I was doing research. First, you went to law school. I'm not sure if you practiced law, but you went to a law school. Then you spent more than, a couple decades working in life sciences, in quality assurance and reg affairs. And then you went on to become a writer. To me, the 3 don't line up. So can you walk me through what was going on in your career when you were going through these phases?
Yeah, nothing intentional. I just so I started heading towards a law degree after a science degree that was pretty heavy in psychology. And I was called to the bar. I did my articling and all that kind of stuff. And then someone I knew mentioned an opportunity as a quality/regulatory person in a small medical device startup. I knew nothing. I didn't even know what a quality and regulatory person was. I knew nothing about it, but it sounded interesting. This is also when I had just had my first child, and I realized I don't think I want to do that lawyer thing that I thought I wanted to do before I had kids. So I thought, let me do this. So I took that job and I stayed in that area for 20 years. That company was purchased a few years in. It was purchased by an international conglomerate. So I worked there for a bit. And then the original owner started another startup and pulled me over and all the other staff and hired me. So I worked with him again. And then that company was purchased. And then the same thing repeated 3 times. So it was small, big, small, big, small. And then I left altogether. I left at around about the same time that my youngest child was leaving for university. So it was sort of like a transition point in my life. And it was like, well, what do I want to do when I grow up? That was sort of my thinking. So yeah, so it's kind of a weird path, but I feel like what I'm doing now is everything that I've ever done has led to this point and made me the perfect person for what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, what's interesting is that you obviously have the fundamentals, like going to law school. You've studied a lot of regulations. I'm guessing when you were in school, you've had to go through that process of understanding what a 30-page regulation means and how you can remember the concept in 2 or 3 paragraphs, so you can study that in school. Then you worked in the industry, so you have the application of how that works, and now you're helping others write. So you have the perfect, even though it wasn't planned, when as an outsider looking in, you've had the perfect foundation to be successful.
Yeah, and I think for me too, what's really helpful is that I had to teach myself everything about the quality and regulatory stuff. I knew how to read regulations and I knew how to think and all of that stuff. And that's why this guy hired me. He's like, well, she's got a brain, she can figure this out. But I knew nothing about medical devices. I'm in Canada, so it was the Canadian, the Canadian system. But I taught myself everything. And I think when you teach yourself everything, you learn it differently than if someone throws a book in front of you. And so I really feel I have a good understanding especially of what new people are faced with when they're in this industry.
Yeah. So talking about, good understanding of writing, I'm actually so excited about, talking this topic with you about writing, because I don't think it gets enough attention that it deserves. It's not a juicy topic like, quality 4.0 or digital transformation and AI and all these trends, but it's such a fundamental topic, in a business world or even in personal relationships. So I'm really excited to learn more about this, because there's something in here for everyone, even if a listener that's not in life sciences, I'm sure they can take away something from this that we're going to
Yeah,
discuss today.
absolutely.
So when you're working with professionals or clients, what are, like, if you were to list one or three top challenges that you've seen over and over happening with professionals in regards to writing and communication, what are those top?
I think what happens is that we write the way have been rewarded to write in university, in school, in high school. You're rewarded to write as much as you can. You're aiming for a 500 word limit, 10,000 word paper, whatever. And the goal is to show the teacher how much you know, right? You're trying to get an A, right? That's not the goal of writing in the real world. So it's a completely different shift of mindset about what writing is about. And I don't think people make that shift. In the real world, you got to remember that really the main things you got to think about are the reader and why you're writing whatever it is you're writing, and then adjusting things accordingly. And people don't really do that. They're not necessarily thinking of the reader. They're thinking of themselves. They're thinking of showing how much they know. They're thinking of making themselves look like an expert, all of that stuff. And they're not thinking, wait a second, I just got to write what I need to write to get this person to do what I need him to do or need him to know.
So I want to read something that I found on your LinkedIn profile, and these are your words. I help people improve their communication skills so their outside matches their inside and they get the respect and authority they deserve based on their education, experience, and knowledge. First of all, I love like how you've captured like your entire purpose, vision, goal, whatever it is, in just like handful of words in one sentence. Walk me through, how did you come through that, like how did you decide that this is what's going to go on, like how walk me through the process of how you define that as your purpose.
Well, first of all, for a little better context, when I started off doing this online business teaching-y stuff, I work with a lot of non-native English speakers who often lack confidence with their English and worry that it undermines their expertise and authority. So that's sort of where that sort of statement came from. Like, there are these highly educated people, umpteen numbers of PhDs under their belt, and they're nervous because
Right.
of their English. So for me, that's what I started off doing. And then I've kind of shifted into helping people generally, native speakers, non-native speakers, just be clearer when they're talking about the quality stuff. And now it's even shifting more towards really sort of helping people communicate in a way that helps them build a quality culture at their place. That's sort of the direction I seem to be going now. So that's how that first came to be, like that kind of phrasing.
You obviously shared the challenge that people face, and when you are giving them recommendation as a consultant, as a coach, from all the people and all the clients you've served so far, is there a common one or two recommendations that you see yourself giving every time, that hey, first do one and two before you do
Yeah.
anything else?
Yeah, sort of. Like, I would say, and the advice is the same for native speakers, non-native speakers, doesn't matter. My advice for the non-native English speakers would be, first of all, don't worry about perfection with your grammar and don't worry about your accent. That stuff doesn't really matter. Just know what your message is and you'll be fine. So my first point really is, like, be clear in your thinking, right? Most unclear communication is unclear because the thinking is unclear.
Right.
So know your message, know who you're talking to, and know what you want to happen in this conversation or this bit of writing. So that would be my number one. And then my number two, which is easier if number one is in place, is to keep things simple. So simple usually means clear. Clear usually means people understand you. And that's presumably the goal. So if you confuse people by using words and phrases they don't know, or they're not going to think you're smart. They're either going to think you're arrogant or you're confused, right? And they probably won't understand what you're saying. So keep it clear by keeping things simple. And I have to add a third one, and it's listen, right? Because there's no way we can know our audience, which is our reader or our listener, if we aren't listening to them. We have to know what they know, what their biases and priorities and motivations are, how they feel about us and whatever it is we're dealing with. So we have to listen so we know how to approach those conversations with a sense of empathy and figuring out what we need to say to get this person to do what we need them to do. So those are my three.
That's great. I really, the one about using simple language or simple writing is the one that really resonated with me. And I'm speaking from experience here. When I started creating content on LinkedIn, or I started my business and talking to clients, even just emails, I used, tools like Hemingway and Grammarly and all these other tools that kind of go and scan your text and tell you what grade level are you writing at. Like, I started like obsessing over that so much, where if my text was at 8th or ninth grade reading level, I tried to cut the words
Yeah,
to bring it to 5th or 6th grade. And it just makes it easy for the person to understand.
yeah,
It appears to be more natural. We're not, again, going to your point, is I don't use those words when I talk to someone. So
exactly.
I don't want to be using them in an email.
And there's so much evidence, like scientific evidence, about how we read. So we
Right.
should probably use that and let that dictate how we should write, right? So yeah, keeping it simple. People are afraid to keep things simple. I think they're afraid that they won't seem as professional or smart and savvy or something like that. But honestly, if people understand you, they will think you're smart. You know what you're
Right.
talking about, right? It's so logical, but there's such resistance. And I think part of it too is people tend to want to write the way they see other people around them writing, right? And so it feels like I don't want to be the one to make this big shift and suddenly start writing in it's totally different way. If my boss is writing this sort of like passive, formal, archaic kind of way, there's that pressure, there's like peer pressure almost to keep
Yep.
that kind of writing going. So my mission in life is to say, forget it.
Yeah. One of the specific things about writing that is, it's one of my pet peeves, is acronyms.
Mine too.
There are so many acronyms in like QA, Reg Affairs, and Life Sciences. QA and RA, that itself is,
Yeah.
this starts from
Yeah.
there. And then when I join a new company, or when I was working and now as a consultant, there are like internal company acronyms. So here's an example. I was sitting in a meeting and somebody said, "Oh, yeah, we can't really do anything about this change control until we talk to CRP, or until CRP does something." And it was my first week. And I had to ask my colleague, "Hey, what is CRP?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Change review panel." I was like, okay,
Okay.
thank you. Now I understand what was happening in the last 15 minutes. So, do you have any do's and don'ts with acronyms that people need to remember, specifically inside their business documentation?
Yeah, well, it's one of my pet peeves too. There's acronyms and initialisms, which are slightly different. An acronym is when the initials are said as a word, like
Okay.
kappa instead of CAPA, we say kappa. And initialisms are when you say each letter separately, like MDR or UFO or something like that, right?
Mm,
So
okay.
I think the best way to use them is to not use them. I'm on your team. Like,
Love that.
unless you are 150% sure that everyone knows them. For instance, like MDR. In some places, that's medical device regulations. In other places, it's medical device reporting. And it could be a million other things. So we have to be careful. And especially because we're working almost always with international peers and colleagues and customers and everything. So
Yep.
if there's an acronym that's important for everyone to know, that's fine. But take the time not just to tell them what it is, but to tell them what it means, right? So, for example, you might say CAPA. So if you say, oh, that's easy, that's corrective and preventive action. Does that help someone actually understand what that is? Like, no, no, it doesn't. So those are just words. So if you're going to use it, make sure you tell the people what it actually means. A big problem with this is that people people really don't want to admit that they don't know. Like you didn't say, oh, what's CRP? Like you didn't say that. You just scurried away and asked somebody quietly, like, what are they talking about? Because you think you should know it, or you think that everyone else knows it, or whatever. So even if someone says, does everyone know what that means? And you nod, you should still, take that moment to quickly refresh people.
Right. And when you were talking about acronyms and explaining these things, I can relate to that, because even in like another example that came to my mind was GDP. So sometimes when people say GDP, it's not clear if they're referring to good documentation practices, good distribution
Yeah.
practices. So if I'm in a supply chain meeting or a manufacturing meeting, or they're talking about, I have to like assume the context and think, oh, they might be referring to this. So that's another example that gets really,
Yeah.
because the GDP is such a common thing that people use.
And you should ask for, if you're using it, go ahead and say GDP, good distribution practices. This is what I'm talking about. Like, go out and say it. If it's in a document, make sure you've got it either defined somewhere, or right afterwards, write out the words, right? You don't have to do it every time it appears, but the first time it appears, write it out, and then so that everyone's on the same page. Yeah, it's tricky, especially because it's a global workforce now. And
Right. So another question I have about this is more around writing style, and I have always thought about this myself, and I struggle with this a lot. I'm not perfect at this. How can someone switch or adapt their writing style? Because if you look at me or you today, or anybody in the industry, right, we are writing emails, we are writing some sort of chat messages in our company internal systems, we're creating PowerPoint slides, we're probably writing SOPs, policies, or documents. And if we post on social media, we're also writing content, right? So how can someone adapt their writing style depending on where they're writing? And they might have to write the same content in 5 different
different
ways.
ways,
If you,
yeah.
yeah.
That's a really good question, and it always comes back to the same thing. You always got to be thinking of your audience and your purpose, right? So that's always the starting point. Who's going to read this? Do I know this person? Am I trying to be authoritative? Am I trying to let them see my personality? Like maybe on a social media post, you want them to see that you've got a sense of humor or something. So, okay. Am I trying to be controversial? Am I trying to push some buttons here? Am I trying to put some ideas out in the world for the sake of testing them to see what other people think? Am I laying down the law? What exactly am I trying to do? So you kind of really got to do that thinking part first and say, what? Because all of that dictates the tone.
Hmm.
And the tone is kind of determined by the sentence structure and the word choice, right?
Right.
So I guess you're kind of asking, like, well, how do I change the sentence structure and word choice, right? So if you're writing something that's more academic or formal, like, I don't know, like a white paper or procedures or something, you'll probably ditch the contractions and pronouns and words like
Yep.
ditch, right? You might say the evidence shows versus I think, like just little things like that, right? You put the I and you and we in it if it's less formal. You might use more passive sentences in something that's more formal. The podcast was recorded by us rather than we recorded a podcast. But it's important to remember that even with a technical document, there's no need for particularly heavy duty words. And this is where we go wrong, right? Obviously, there's going to be more technical words in a technical document because you need them there, right? And that's fine. But as a rule, you kind of got to think, okay, no matter what you're writing, you're just going to use the simplest word that works.
Yep.
So, for example, this is my pet peeve. There's no reason I can think of where the word utilize is a better choice than the word use. Like, I
I
can't think of
agree.
a single time when that would make the sentence better or clearer, right? So really, if you're writing for the audience, you don't really have to make too many changes in terms of the words, because you want to be using plain words no matter what you're writing as much as possible. Getting rid of contractions, like when you put an apostrophe instead of you are, you say your. That might be a fair a fair one to change if you're going to be going more formal for two reasons. They don't sound as conversational, like in an email or a social media post. Put them in, it sounds more conversational, makes you sound more human. You don't need to sound like that in some sort of technical document. But also, when we're talking about a workforce with, so many different native languages, people might not understand them. You don't want somebody not understanding that don't means do not in a procedure, right? So get rid of them in like really important documents. And then the other obvious thing that you could change in terms of switching up the style would be the structure and the layout. So again, you're considering the audience and the purpose, and that usually tells you what to do. Does someone need to find something really quickly in here? Will they know what to do, like where to look? Will they be scanning and jumping around on this document, or will they just be sitting down and reading it? So that sort of thing determines, do I put bullet points? Do I put headings? What do I do here, right? But ultimately, really what I think is it's not so much understanding how to change things, but it's really about understanding how we read. And since it's a person reading in every case, the changes don't really have to be that dramatic. We're still dealing with the human brain, right?
Correct. Yep.
And even super bright, highly educated people like to read things that are easy to read. There's evidence for that, right?
Yep.
We tend to write our technical documents as though they are some sort of academic document, and we go all passive voice and prim and proper, and we shouldn't necessarily be doing that, right? But we're kind of stuck in that mode because that's what exists already in our companies, right? We're kind of afraid to be different, like I said earlier. But that formal, passive, long writing with the big words and the long sentences, it creates a big cognitive load, right? It makes our brain work too hard. Yeah. And we don't want to tire people out when they're reading important things, right? We want to keep things really simple and clear so that they still have some brain space left to do the thinking that we want them to be doing, right? A tired brain is going to make more mistakes. A tired brain is going to take longer to read and longer to make decisions and maybe not make good decisions. And so passive writing and unfamiliar words tire the brain. So just keeping that in mind is like, oh, okay, like that's the motivation to change our style a little bit, right?
Yeah, it's more tiring to know what utilize means if you're not from English is not your first language, or even not utilize but some other word. If you use simpler words, people more likely to know what it means, and it's less stress on their brain to figure that out.
Even utilize 3 syllables, use 1. The time savings alone, when you're paying someone's salary and they take longer to read a document, like if you start thinking of it like that, it's scary to think how much time is wasted because of the way we write.
Yeah, I want to switch gears here and talk a topic that is really hot right now. Everyone's talking about it: artificial intelligence tools and writing. Right? There's everything. Pretty much 1 in 5 posts on my LinkedIn are about ChatGPT and how people are testing it out with different inputs and see what it can do. Have you played with it?
I haven't played with it because I'm scared to play with it. But my understanding is that these things gather their data from existing data points, right?
Yeah.
And then they kind of like predict what a next good thing would be. But if they're gathering their data, which in this case would be writing from existing writing, I think they're just going to continue mimicking the poor writing that's currently out there.
Yep.
Right? That's sort of my initial thought. I'm not too panicked about it. I think for sure there's going to be certain types of writing that will be replaced and certain types of writers that will be replaced. But I figure that anyone who thinks is safe, right? I think it'll do a really good job of gathering up what already exists and putting it together. So people who reproduce what's already out there, that they'll be easily replaced. And maybe that's fine. That motivates people to use their heads more, right? Something like a literature review, that's easy for AI, right? But, can the machine then come up with an opinion or a new direction to go or a new theory, right? Maybe eventually, but I don't think I hope I hope not anytime soon, right?
Yeah, it's really it really is just a tool, and the quality of the outputs depends on the specific inputs that you provide, right? So if you want a certain tone, you're going to have to specify that. So just somebody having access to chat gpt doesn't make them a good writer. That's not going to happen. But if they're able to get an outline, or if they're able to get an output from tool like ChatGPT or any other AI writing tool, then they can, tweak that language to maybe apply something like you said of, hey, how do I make this two sentences simple? Or
Exactly.
how do I
Exactly.
change my tone so it doesn't come as authoritative and comes as empathetic or whatever. So, yeah.
I mean, I think we have to remember what I said earlier. Good writing happens before you start writing. Good writing comes from good thinking, and machines can't think. You got to think first and then feed that thought into the machine. The machine will then give you the words to express that thought. I think that it's going to be a great tool, and it's definitely a game changer. I think it's going to help people write more concisely. They'll throw their stuff in and it'll come out with nice, clean writing. It'll probably help with clarity. And I think it'll maybe give us more options for putting our particular thought into words, right?
Yep.
Sometimes we just like, oh, I don't know how to say this. Like, okay, let's put it in and see what comes out, right? And I'm pretty sure, like you said, if you give it the right instructions, it will be able to change the style of our writing. I bet you could say, write this with a more formal tone, or inject some humor into this, or change this industry white paper into something more suitable for a LinkedIn post. And I bet it would be able to do that. I think also it's going to be really helpful for non-native English speakers, and it will bridge that language gap, allowing them to participate more in business conversations, and more than, because they sort of lack the confidence now, I think, to be able to, voice their thoughts. So as much as I want to run the other way with this AI stuff, I think it's definitely a game changer. But I don't think it's actually going to replace humans. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's still too early to say, because, like I said, it's missing that critical thinking component, which is gonna, maybe it will happen someday. It might take some time to get there. But as of now, it's just input outputs. The outputs are very generic. So it's gonna also separate writers who are using it a lot. All of their content and text is gonna look and sound the same, but other writers who are skilled at injecting their personality into the text or injecting their style will easily be separated. Like you could read something and say, I know Lesley wrote this, or you could read that and say, oh, this is just the AI content. And people are going to figure that out soon, because everyone's going to be, exploiting the use of it.
yeah,
So
I do want to start playing with it just to see what happens. But yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah.
So when you were mentioning about, non-native speakers, something that came to my mind is, when I've seen this myself working in life science companies, especially organizations that have different sites, or they have colleagues and partners and suppliers, contract manufacturers in different countries. How can people, what are the best practices either for writing or speaking that companies or employees can use when they're talking to me in US, talking to somebody in Japan or somebody in India? Do you have any advice for that?
I think, I think it basically comes down to having a relationship with them. One of the critical things we have to think about is sort of our intercultural awareness, so that we know how does this culture, how do hierarchies work in this culture, how does politeness work in this culture, how does all this stuff work. But I think we really, if we focus on the relationships and building trust, then the communication part is pretty easy. You've got this give and take, you're open, you can say if you don't agree or you don't understand, you feel more comfortable saying that. If you've got this very formal relationship and you're at a distance, it's really hard to admit when you don't know something, or to set them on the right path if they've made a mistake, right? So I really do think it comes down to the relationships.
And when you talked about culture, what is your definition of a quality culture for a company?
Okay, you'd think I would have a nice, clean definition, right? All this
Yeah.
time. Really, what I think is that a culture is where everyone understands the big picture of their organization, the big picture of their role, and the big picture of quality. And where everyone, top to bottom, takes actions that reflect the shared vision of quality. So, to be a little more succinct, I would say it's a culture where clarity, trust, and effective communication that's driven by whatever the organization stands for, as well as the goal of continuous improvement and employee engagement. I think all of those things, like it's so big. That's why I think I've never
Yeah.
gotten it down, right? Does everyone understand why, the big why of their organization? Like literally why it exists. Why are we in business, right? Do they understand what quality is all about? Why do they have a quality management system, right? Do they understand their role in the bigger picture and how it's all connected? And do they know what quality actually looks like in actions, not just in words, right? And ideally it has to come from the top, but we know that that is not always how it is. And I really believe you can make tracks building quality culture from down below if the people on top aren't on board yet. I think there has to be a lot of awareness, training, education, um, and there has to be real clarity on sort of the connection between the business objectives and the quality objectives, and like ideally they're going in the same direction.
Yeah, it's not an easy task for any, company or senior management or leader, because I've seen a lot of companies make a lot of changes and the approach is really well received by employees. But in other companies, it could be a very similar company, similar size, and they just try something different and the outcome is completely disastrous. It
Yeah,
doesn't work at all.
yeah.
So are there like any ideas that you have, for leaders or senior management who are trying to improve their culture? Let's say they have some things that are working for them and maybe other areas that are not working. Is there some, how can they figure out which thread to pull or which button to flip, so to speak, to tweak their culture?
I think like this is probably not the answer that anyone wants to hear, but it's a long process. And I think it really comes down to the relationship. So you were saying sometimes even in two companies that look very similar size wise and maybe everything wise, they look similar. And one company takes off in terms of culture, the other doesn't. What's the difference? I probably, if you looked at the relationships, that's what it is, right? In my experience, having had those 20 years of going from small to startup to big multinational, small, big, without a question, there was a stronger culture in the smaller companies, without a doubt. And my feeling about that is because it was we treated each other like people. We realized we were people, right? I remember the first time the small startup was purchased by the big company. Corporate, we got corporate sent us some instructions, and the instructions were, oh, we've got these posters that have the company values and mission statements and all this stuff, and we need you to put them up in your office. And we're like, okay. Oh, and you have to get approval for the frame size and the matting color and the matting size and where the poster is in the frame. And we are all going, what is this how things work in a big company? What about the words on the documents, right? It felt really ridiculous. And then when the people actually from corporate came, they walked in as if they owned the world, oblivious to the fact that we had all have an existing culture. We are all this small group of people that built this from scratch. And they just came in and started throwing in their jargon, like lean this and lean that. And we're all going, what are they talking about? It was like the secret language, right? And then we go away and we go, oh, we're doing all that anyway. We just didn't put a fancy word on it, right? So,
Yeah.
and it's not that I don't even, I think it's not the size of the company. I really think it's the relationships. And so if even in a big company, you can focus on getting to know people as people, which means being vulnerable a bit yourself too as a leader, showing yourself as a person, right? Then you're going to gain that trust that will then allow you to more easily influence people to like adopt this shared mindset. It's like we're a team, right?
Yeah.
Versus,
Yeah.
yeah.
In my career, I've worked at some companies, just like you were mentioning, that were like a small group or that had a great culture. And I've gone through, mergers and acquisitions, and then things started changing.
Yeah.
I won't go into much into that in this episode. Maybe I'll save it for some other. But I completely understand where you were going with that, and I've seen it happen, with colleagues and with people, and how the communication and writing completely changed. And it's so hard to keep that culture, but that's what you need to preserve, because that's what helps people have fun. They're productive. It has a lot of good things happening behind the scenes that you need to preserve.
I think as leaders, the key things you need to do are listen, right? Really listen, understand quality yourself. Like sometimes leaders just, they come from another field, they,
Right.
whatever. So go understand quality, make it your business to understand this, right? And then focus on the relationships, focus on being human, focus on building trust, be in touch with the employees, be tuned into how everyone feels, and show up with their own actions, not just with words, like really walk the talk. And that's when you're going to get that respect, and people are going to go, oh, okay, I get it. This is how we do things here. Like it's almost a matter of like getting to the point where quality is common. It's just how we do things. It's no big deal, right? Because everybody does it, starting at the
Yep. Yep. So, any books that come to mind for anyone that's trying to improve their writing or communication? Is there something that you recommend to your clients?
Yeah, there's a good one. I've got a few books here beside me. This one here, The Oxford Guide to Plain English by Martin Cutts, and it's just a great reference book, and with a focus on plain language. And it deals with all the basics from like planning something all the way to editing. Edit includes like little chapters on writing emails, writing different types of documents. So that's a really good like basic book. And it has also like simpler versions of, instead of utilize, say use, right? Instead of demonstrate, say show. So it's just got sort of nice lists and things that you can refer to there to sort of get your mind thinking more simply. There's one that's more specific to pharma. So I have a friend on LinkedIn, Kathy Walsh, who wrote this book a few years ago, Eliminating the Gobbledygook, Secrets to Writing Plain Language Procedures. So it's quite specific about procedures, and it includes parts about process mapping and document design, as well as some advice on how to talk to subject matter experts and things like that. So that it's kind of a nice tool. This is a really good one, The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. It's I think 2013, 2014. I just think that in our work now, we are always working in this international context. So it just really helps us understand how other people think and behave so that we can sort of interpret whatever they're doing and saying in the right light, right? And then for me, I like this book on emotional intelligence by Daniel Goleman, because I think emotional intelligence is so key, and it's something that nobody teaches us ever, right? If you're lucky, you grow up in a family where people are in tune emotionally, but I think it's just a really good one. I think I really believe, I did a post on this today actually, that good communication comes down to empathy. And in order to have empathy, one of the ways we develop it really is through reading fiction. Reading fiction, believe it or not. And people think, oh no, I'll read work stuff. It's like, no, it's not about the knowledge. It's about putting yourself in other people's shoes, right? And and sort of seeing the world a different way from the way we see the world. And that is critical if you're going to communicate well, because the two things we're thinking about are purpose and audience. So we've got to know the audience, right?
Yeah, those are all great recommendations. I read the one from Daniel Coleman about emotional intelligence. I have seen Kathy Walsh on my LinkedIn
Yeah.
feed. I've engaged with some of her content. I didn't know that she had written a book. I'll check that one out. That sounds interesting. It's specifically targeted to life science industry. So what about like your 2023? Are you working on any interesting projects? Do you have any goals that you're trying to accomplish?
Well, I feel like I joke with my husband that I kind of like just started my business by accident, right? So it's like, okay. So probably I want to be a little more intentional about the direction I go in as I move forward. I want to try and do more corporate work. I've just started like, because I started off with just one on one, coaching people with their communication skills. Over the past year, I've gotten into some corporations, sort of working with their quality team on their um, on their quality initiatives from the communication side. So helping them prepare their presentations or helping them think through what's going to be our communication strategy here for trying to get a quality culture going in their workplace. So I want to do more corporate stuff like that. And I've also got on the books coming up doing some corporate training where I'm doing writing coaching within corporations. So we'll see how that goes. And then I would like eventually to have some sort of digital products that I can, make some passive income, and then sort of focus less and less on the one-on-one because it's just so time intensive. And yeah, so that's sort of my goals.
Great. Yeah, wish you all the best with all of that. I've seen, your stuff on LinkedIn, and I've, like I said at the start of the episode, this topic doesn't really get the attention that it deserves. So I'm rooting for all the projects that you're working on. And where can the audience and listeners find you or connect with you to talk about anything that you shared?
Well, the only place in terms of social media, the only place I am on is LinkedIn and just Lesley Worthington. And then my website is lesleyworthington.com. I just keep it simple. And my email is leslie@lesleyworthington.com. So that's it. Pretty straightforward. Will I go on other social media? I don't know. It feels exhausting, just the thought of it. It's like, oh God.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I'm only on active on LinkedIn. I have Twitter, but I don't use it as much. But yeah, any final thoughts you want to add? Do you any questions that come to your mind that you thought I was going to ask you but I didn't?
No, no, this was excellent. I feel like I got a chance to share what I wanted to share. We touched on a lot of things. We could have gone more deeply into everything probably, but no, it was great. Nothing that I can think to add.
Yeah, thanks again for giving us your time. Thanks for sharing all the valuable advice. Tons of stuff here. I'm going to listen to this one a few times because I'm trying to improve my writing just in everything that I'm doing. And thank you so much for coming on to the show and sharing your insights on writing and communication.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.